morning, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I recap live trials. Yes, we're following two of them. The Scott Peterson School Resource Officer trial for the February 14th shooting that occurred in the 1200 building at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And it's alleged that he failed to follow his training by going towards the gunshots, entering the 1200 building, risking his own life, trying to disrupt Nicholas Cruz's shooting rampage. Now, by the time that Scott Peterson gets to that side door, the east stairwell door that goes up to the 1200, where you can enter the 1200 building, and by the time he gets there, Nicholas Cruz is on the west end of the building, and almost simultaneous to when you heard the different times of things, just as he gets to that 1200 building, the east side, on the west side, Aaron Feist is opening the door and is shot by Nicholas Cruz. And those shots are the door was open. The west side stairwell door was open. Nicholas Cruz shoots outside, the west side stairwell, shoots Aaron Feist, and he falls outside of the 1200 building on the west side. Then Nicholas Cruz proceeds up to the second floor and then the third floor of the 1200 building. So simultaneous with Aaron Feist getting shot by Nicholas Cruz on the 76 yards away on the other side of the building, Scott Peterson, the school resource officer, hears those gunshots. And that's when he goes on the radio and says, "Shots fired." After that, he proceeds over towards the 700 building. Instead of going inside the 1200 building, he runs over to the building 7. Now, had he run into that building, I think my opinion is that he would have just been shot by Nicholas Cruz as well. But Nicholas was on the other side of the building in the stairwell and on his way up to the second floor. So at this point, what Officer Scott Pearson would have seen had he entered that building would be this massacre that had just been done on the first floor. So at this point, he believed that the gunshots were coming from the football field, which is west of the west entrance. That's where he thought those gunshots were coming from. But no one ever told him, hey, no, there's somebody in the 1200 building. So we're going to get to the testimony that occurred yesterday. So the very last person that takes the stand is the lead investigator for the Nicholas Cruz case. Now, he testified that he was in, he's a detective. He was in his office, Broward Sheriff's Office, and when he got the call that there was a shooting happening, at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. So he proceeded with a lot of other people. I think half the county was at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School that day. By the time he gets there and parks, he said it was like a parking lot of police officers that were on the scene. And Nicholas Cruz was long gone by the time he gets there. At the point that he gets there, he sees children that are evacuating the buildings, all the buildings. They're just self-evacuating, coming towards the ones that were coming towards where he was directing them to drop their backpacks and just keep going and go. He directed them to a place where they could sit down and either wait for their parents or wait for further guidance. So that's one of the things he did. He had the knowledge that SWAT was already in the building. He and the other detectives started interviewing those kids to see if there was any intel that they could tell him like what was going on, because he really didn't have any knowledge of what was going on. Like, he knew there was an active shooter, didn't know if they'd caught the active shooter. Like, he didn't know, and neither did these kids. They had no idea. I think those kids thought they were fleeing a fire alarm. So this is the witness that the prosecution was offering to explain the last charge, which is perjury. You know, Scott Peterson is charged with 7 counts of child neglect, several counts of culpable negligence, and a count of perjury. So this guy, he became the lead investigator. He was telling us that he pretty much talked to like every kid in that school. He had a team of people and they each had like 25, 30 names, and they would contact those people. And if they had any relevant information, then he would interview them. So he interviewed a lot of people, including parents, teachers, administrators, police officers. So he interviews Scott Peterson, and he asks Scott Peterson he's asking them about that whole scenario, the one I just talked about, where Nicholas Cruz is at the west end of the building shooting Aaron Feist as Scott Peterson's pulling up on the east end of the building. And he says to Scott, "How many gunshots did you hear?" And he said 2 or 3. So this is how the prosecution believes he perjured himself. And he's saying, because he obviously heard way more gunshots than that, but he thought he meant, you know, because they were just talking about the gunshot, you know, the ones he heard when he got to the door, when we know that Aaron Feist was shot, and it was 2 or 3. So that's, if you believe that. And he goes, no, no, I clarified that several times during the interview with him, that was the amount of gunshots he heard. And so the defense attorney said, did you ask him in totality how many he heard? And he goes, no, he knew what I meant. Well, maybe he didn't. So I don't know that that they're really going to pursue this perjury thing with him. I don't know. I'm surprised they're pursuing this entire thing with him, but uh, whatever. So the other thing that the defense got out of this witness is that the best source of information, and the witness agreed with this, the best source of information or intel would have been from those kids that were inside the 1200 building calling 911 on their phones. And he agreed, yes, that would have been the best source of the intel. But they didn't have that intel, he says, because our phones were not working properly that day. He said what was happening is there were so many people on the Broward Sheriff's Office radio that day that it was, for lack of a better, well, what he said was it went into fail soft mode, the radio, so that nobody could talk. Like when you keyed the radio, and he said, he was asked to describe what was happening, is when you would key the radio, you would just get this weird sound, because there were so many people trying to talk at the same time that it just kind of cut the radio off altogether. Plus, he said they attempted to patch their radio with the Coral Springs radio, who had all of that intel about where exactly Nicholas Cruz was in that building and when, but it didn't work. The patch didn't work that day. So, as a former risk manager, I'm going to tell you that this was a system failure, not a lone school resource officer failure. This was a system failure. Like when you're a risk manager, you look at the Swiss cheese, like where were all the holes that led this to occur? And most of the holes had to do with that radio, a lot of them. Poor, I really feel bad for the school resource officer. He's standing there, he's got a school radio and he's got the BSO radio. He doesn't know what Coral Springs knows. The school resource the school radio makes it, the people communicating on that radio are saying that it's out, west of the 1200 building out towards a football field. So, and he heard the gunshots, but because of the echo, he could not tell where these gunshots were coming from. So he did not have the intel that would have been available had the those two responding teams, Coral Springs and Broward Sheriff's Office, been talking to each other on the same radio channel through a patch, or had the Broward Sheriff's Office radios worked properly, which they did not. And this guy admitted that, yeah, all that was an issue. So following this witness, the prosecution rested their case. So the judge asked the jury to go take an early lunch and come back at 1:30. They had some business to attend to, and that's the judgment of acquittal. And I've talked about this many, many times. This is a routine motion at the end of the prosecution's case that the defense makes. And what they do is say, in the light most favorable to the prosecution did not put in enough evidence for a jury to find their client guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of child neglect. They've and here's the judge's comments to the prosecution. He says, the judge read the elements of the charge of child neglect. And he said, under these, one of the elements is that Scott Peterson his actions would have had to cause harm to those children. And, as a result of his whatever he did or didn't do, harm occurred to those children. And he says, you've put on a lot of evidence to show that he wasn't following his training, but what, I'm struggling to find where the evidence is that he caused the death of these children. So the prosecution, they got up and they argued, well, it was his failure to act. He didn't enter the building. He didn't, they mentioned several things. So the judge says, all right, I'm going to deny the motion for judgment of acquittal. I'm going to let this go to the jury. I'm going to let them decide. So what's going to happen? He's going to read the elements of each one of these charges to the jury, and they're going to have to find that all those elements were present. And they, it sounds like even the judge was struggling to find all of those elements of child neglect. So the defense went ahead and started their case. This was yesterday. So the first person that was put on was a math teacher. She was on the second floor of this building 7, which is, right across a little strip of grass from building 12, but she was up on the second floor. Now she had allowed, they were having a math test, and she had allowed one of her students to go to the bathroom, Xavier. And right after she let him go to the bathroom, she hears this loud noise, and nobody could figure out what it was. So she thinks, okay, it's Xavier. He's setting off firecrackers or something. So let me go find out what he's doing. So she leaves the classroom. She walks outside her door. Xavier runs up to her and says, it wasn't me. I don't know what that noise is. So then all of a sudden they hear more of these loud sounds. And she said, this poor teacher, you could tell she was suffering from PTSD. I mean, you could just tell. She never went back to teaching after that day. So she said at this point she looked over like the little balcony that was there. She saw the school resource officer. She saw him drawing his gun out of his holster. Then she looked at the bottom floor of the 1200 building and she could see movement through the window and smoke. So she, in her mind, was thinking the building is collapsing. So she said, Xavier, get back in the classroom. She runs back in the classroom and they all hide, because right after that, the code red is called, which is the active shooter um, signal. But she had never heard gunshots before in her life. So she didn't really know that that's what she was hearing. She really said she said the sounds were, it was so loud, the sounds were bouncing off the building, it was reverberating, there was a loud echo, and she did say it sounded like it was coming from that west end of the building. Not necessarily in a building, but she had seen that smoke, so she thought that building was collapsing. So when this was all before the fire alarm went off. It wasn't until she got back into the classroom that the fire alarm went off, and then they hear the code red. So she never evacuated any of her kids. She just got them all into a corner. She said we waited for hours before the SWAT team came and got us to safety. And these meanwhile, they're all huddled together, her and her kids that had just finished this math test. And she said that they were getting texts and phone calls, so they knew what was happening. They knew that kids had died. They knew that there was a shooting, and they're sitting there waiting to get out of there. So you could tell it just really, really affected this woman. It really did. Then they had a child come on, not a child anymore. He just graduated from college, but he was in 11th grade at the time of the shooting. I should be diamond painting, right? What number do I have out? 8. Okay. And he was also in the 700 building. And he was up on the second floor, not in the classroom where this prior teacher was, but in a different classroom. Also a math class, calculus, advanced calculus. I never took calculus. So they heard fire alarm, and they started exiting their classroom. He saw Scott Peterson. They were exiting toward the way they're told to exit is through that west or the east part of the building. So they were headed towards the east stairs so they could get out to the parking lot. And they saw Scott Peterson, because that's kind of where he had taken cover down on the first floor. They saw him, and they saw him unholstering his weapon. And that's when they thought, oh, let's go back in the classroom. So they all turned around and went back in the classroom because they could hear what was going on. He said they heard shots. He said they heard shots. He said it sounded like it was coming from the direction of the west side of the stairwell of the building he was in, the 700 building. He and his classmates were going down the east side, and he thought he heard the sound coming from the west side of building 7. So they all go back in. He said it just sounded like loud pops. Then the next person on the stand was another student, female who just graduated from FSU with plans to become a doctor. So she was in the drama class, which was on the first floor. As they were exiting for the fire alarm, uh, she heard loud sounds. She said it was really, really loud. It was reverberating off the buildings. And she thought they were coming from the football field, west. She did not think that they were coming from the 1200 building. So that is where we leave off with Scott Peterson. So the judge had the jury come in at after lunch today. So they did not start testimony until after lunch. Before that, they were working on jury instructions and things like that. I still don't know if Scott Peterson is going to take the stand. The judge asked the defense attorney, and he said, I still need to talk to my client. I can let you know, but I still have witnesses that we're going to put on witnesses. And he goes, okay, we'll have them ready tomorrow 1:30. So they have already started, or 12:30. They started at 12:30 Eastern time. So they're underway right now. Still don't know if he's going to take the stand. I will let you know tomorrow if that happens. So let's move over to the Reptile case. Uh, Bill Zielinski takes the stand. But first, the first person on the stand was Tiffany. And it was funny because Bill, during his testimony, is calling her Tiffany Rose. This woman, I got to tell you, she was so meek. So, like, no affect at all. Just a blank affect. Her hair was down and, prison garb. She's handcuffed. She's serving a 15-year sentence for her part in the shooting of her son, Riley. So she didn't get a trial. She agreed to the 15-year sentence in exchange for pleading guilty and testifying against Bill Zielinski. She was Bill's girlfriend, living with Bill and his wife and her son, Rowan. So when she would be asked a question, she would say, yes, no, well, if you say so, yes. Like not smart alecky at all, just no effect, none. And the prosecution had to lead her by the nose because all I wanted her to do was like come out with a full sentence. What happened? And the prosecutor had to walk her through everything. So then you did this? Yes. Or her answer would be, I don't remember. I think so. Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, that was her testimony. It was so weird. Same thing with the defense attorney. Had to lead her around. It was so weird. It really, really was. Let me find my notes on her. She was saying that the reason the rifle was in the car is because the handgun had been stolen. So on the same day, October 19th, October 15th is when the burglary happened. So on October 15th, these animals are stolen. And that same day, Bill Zielinski's car is burglarized, and there's several weapons taken out of his car, a couple of handguns. So because those handguns were taken out of his car, he put the rifle in his car and he stored it next to him between the driver's seat and the console. This rifle, double barrel shotgun. Yeah, saying. At one point, she said that, and this is all just the prosecution testifying, basically, and she's agreeing that she had tried to leave Bill several times, and she always ended up coming back to him. And she met Bill when he was a police officer. So we'll talk about his police officer days first. And she talked about some of the animals that he would keep. He had bobcats, lemurs, and a wolf, a full-size wolf. Can you imagine? Yeah. Anyway, so she said that they had taken some liquor and a couple of handguns out of Bill Zielinski's car, and that she was concerned about the safety of the animals and the safety of the people. And she said they both were. They were concerned about the safety of the animals and the safety of the people. They suspected Riley because they somehow went onto her Snapchat because Riley used her phone, and her Snapchat showed Riley with the alcohol that had been stolen on his Snapchat. So they kind of suspected him. So she said that they went to a woman named Tara's house because another woman named Mackenzie had information Riley and the animals. Now, Mackenzie is the mother of Riley's child. Tara is Mackenzie's mother. And this is a really, really small town. very small town. Like everybody knows everybody. Um, so they knew Tara. They knew, everybody knows everybody. So she said, on the way to Tara's, they got a call from a woman named Angela, who was the mother of Riley's best friend, who they think was involved in the theft as well. Well, Angela is at this point saying, these animals are in my basement. Could you please come get them out of the basement? And when she got that information from Angela, she was getting it through Bill's phone because Bill was on the phone with his wife, April, updating her on what was going on when he got a call from this Angela, and he put April on call waiting, and he hands the phone to Tiffany because he said this was her friend. He didn't really even know her that well. So Tiffany gets on the phone with Angela, but she's on speakerphone, and she can hear he can he could hear Angela tell him that they had the animals. So he's like, I don't know where Angela lives, and I'm driving, so I didn't write it down. This is his testimony later on. But so she is getting the address for that. And it isn't until she hangs up that they park in front of Tara's house. They see Riley walking. They park in front of Tara's house. Um, and she was questioning, well, why did you stop to talk to Riley? Why didn't you just go get the animals? You were really concerned about them. She says, we just wanted Riley to tell us the truth. Okay. She said that Riley did not try to take the gun from Bill. And then later on, when she was asked that again, she's like, I don't remember. I don't remember. And then towards the end of her testimony, she agreed that it was Bill who was attacking Riley, and she did admit that she had 14 prior convictions. And that was brought out. They didn't go into what the convictions were, but that was brought out to establish that she's not a very credible person. I didn't find her credible at all. I just thought she would say yes to anything that they said to her. Any question that the defense asked her, she went, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm thinking, if I were the judge, I'd went ahead and say, woman, are you awake? Are you listening to these questions? Yeah, she didn't make a very good witness at all. I didn't find her very credible. I really didn't. Um, yeah. So then Bill Zielinski takes the stand. And he talks about how he's always had this very deep respect for exotic animals. He said they're just so different. They're colorful, they're vibrant, he said there's a lot of them are very affectionate. He was asked, well, how does a snake show affection? He goes, well, it's difficult to tell, but you can tell. I'm like, I don't want to know. Anyway, so he talked about like he ran him. This guy was on the stand for hours. So he talks about his love for exotic animals and how did you get into this whole exotic animal thing, and he wanted to become a law enforcement officer, but he wanted to do it like he wanted to be like kind of park ranger type thing. So he went to the police academy. You can go to the police academy. All you have to do is pay the money and go to the police academy. You don't have to go through a specific agency. You don't. Most people wait till they get hired as a police officer for a specific agency, and then that agency pays for them to go to the police academy. Well, he just decided on his own he's going to go to the police academy. Didn't have a job offer. After he goes to police academy, he gets a job in, a limited job as a park ranger. And by limited, he said, there's only certain types of certain times of the year that they're needed. So after that ended, he got a job on the city police force. And he did that for 3.5, 4 years. And then by then his animal business was up and running and he was making money on that. So then let me see if I can get this timeline right, because his attorney wrote out the timeline. So the robbery happens and they get this information that Riley and his friend, I think his name was Austin, might be involved. So Bill calls his friend, who he knows is the property manager of the building where Riley lives. And he said, "Are you around that building at all?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm right across from where Riley's apartment now." And he goes, "Well, is Riley home?" And he says, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, he's home." And he goes, "Can you make sure he doesn't leave? I'm going to call the police. I want the police to go over and question Riley." And apparently Austin was there too. This guy communicated that to him. So, so this guy takes his truck, parks it behind Riley. So Riley, if he wanted to leave, he wouldn't be able to leave unless this guy moved his truck. When the police got there, then the guy he left. So the police respond to that address. So now Bill and Tiffany are on their way over to Riley's apartment. But Bill gets a call from the police at 8:57. They tell him not to come. Don't come. We're taking them into custody for warrants that were um, they were both wanted for something. So they're taken into custody. But the cop tells Bill, "We're going to release them. We're going to book them and then we're going to release them because of COVID. We're not putting anybody in the jail." And part of the issue was the city was investigating the burglary of Bill Zielinski's auto because it was behind his exotic animal shop in town. The county was investigating the theft of the animals because it occurred off Bill's property. So, two separate things that happened on the same day, two different agencies. So, the city had Bill thought they were going to call the county to come question Riley about the animals. That didn't happen. So, following this, let me look on the timeline. Bill heads over to Tara. Bill and Tiffany, they head over to Tara's house. They're friends, and they wanted to see if Mackenzie had any more information about Riley, because apparently Riley had told Mackenzie that he had the animals. So they went over to Tara's to see if there was any more information that could be provided about the location of these animals. So as they're there, Bill gets another call from the police officer regarding Riley. So he says, "Can you come talk to me?" So Bill's like, "Yeah." So he and Tiffany get back in their car. They leave Tara's house. They go talk to the officer for about 20 minutes. And he explains to them, why they had to that they were questioning him, that they would be questioned about the animals by the county, but then they were going to be let go. So he says, "Okay." So he and Tiffany said, "Okay." After they talked to the officer for about 20 minutes, they were going to go back to Tara's house because they never finished their conversation with Tara. They had told Tara, "We'll be right back. We need to go talk to the police officer." Small town. So on their way back to Tara's is when Bill's on the phone with his wife, April, telling her what's going on. And when he gets the call, he gets another call from this Angela lady. He puts April on call waiting. He hands the phone to Tiffany and says, they put it on speaker and he hears about where the location of the animals are. Simultaneous to this, he sees, they're almost to Tara's street. He sees Riley walking. Now it's very, very dark. It's like 10:30 at night now. And let's see, 10:17, 10:17. But he says, I know Riley really, really well. We're friends. He's Tiffany's son. Yeah, I know him. I can see from his stature that it's him. So he wanted to stop at Tara's and tell Tara, don't give him a ride, because he was afraid that if Tara gave him a ride, that he was going to have Tara give him a ride to Angela's house and he was going to dispose of the animals, because this was Bill's thinking, that Riley knew they were on to him and was going to do something with the animals. So that was why another reason why they were going back to Tara's house. So they pull onto Tara's street when they see Riley walking. They're afraid, oh, he's going to go up to Tara's house. So they don't pull into the driveway, they pull in front of the house. They both get out of the vehicle. Bill on the driver's side, Tiffany on the other side. At this point, he says Riley runs up to him and starts screaming and yelling. So he reaches into the car and grabs his rifle. He says, I was scared. This guy was, he, he apparently, and this like took another 45 minutes. They outlined all these instances of violent behavior that Riley had. And I think the meth probably had something to do with that. I don't know why nobody was saying, isn't it because he's a meth addict? Nobody said that, but we know from the medical examiner's office that he was on methamphetamines, which lends itself to this violent behavior. And I got to think that Bill knew that. So he said, I got the gun. And he says, but I had no intention of shooting him with it. I just thought, he might be armed. Let me get this gun. He's screaming at me. I was scared for my life. So he gets out of the car and he's pointing the gun down at the ground. And Riley takes off his jacket. So at this point, he's thinking, okay, probably doesn't have a weapon. So he hands his rifle to Tiffany. And he says, because, I got the rifle out and I didn't have any intention of shooting him. I just thought this would stop him from advancing towards us and prevent him. He would stand down at that point. He says, but he wasn't backing down. The rifle was not having the effect that I thought it would have on him. So I figured, let me go get the stun gun. So he gets the stun gun and he tries to fire Riley with the stun gun, and he thought he fired at him with the stun gun, but apparently it didn't work properly, and he accidentally drops the stun gun, because you do see him picking something up in the video. And he says, but he wasn't successful in picking it up, because he's still, Riley's still advancing towards him. But he did say at this point, when he dropped the stun gun, Riley runs past him, goes towards the vehicle. Now he's thinking, oh my God, he's Tara hollers out, he's going to steal the car. And he's thinking, oh my God, he's going to get a weapon out of the car, because he said there were still multiple weapons in that car. I don't know why he had so many weapons in his car. But Riley comes out of there. So now that he's dropped the stun gun, he takes the rifle back from Tiffany, because he doesn't know if he found a weapon in the car and he's coming out with it. So he said, but he still had it pointed towards the ground. And he said, at this point, there was like a tug of war. He says, Riley grabbed the rifle and my finger slipped onto the trigger. And so I pulled it back, and then he pulled it back. And then he said, when he pulled it back, he pulled it into his chest, and he pulled so hard that my finger slipped and I shot him. And it sounds reasonable. Like if you think of a tug of war, it'd be pretty stupid to pull a rifle into your chest, but it sounds like that's what could have happened. That you could hear on the video that Riley's screaming at him, "Drop it! Fight like a man!" I don't know. So he said he was scared. He was scared for his life. So once Riley is shot, he falls down to his knees and he's clutching his chest, and then he goes down to the ground. At this point, Bill says to Tiffany, because Tiffany's got his phone, we got to call 911, get 911 on the phone. So, and he wanted to talk to 911 because Tiffany, he says, you've heard her demeanor. She's very soft spoken, and I needed to tell them. So he gets on with 911. He said that he had this altercation and he had to shoot this guy that was after him, and that he was shot in the chest. And so he was asked, why didn't you render him aid? And he says, I didn't know that he was dead. I didn't know that he was near. I just heard the gun go off. I didn't know where he was shot. And I thought he might get back up with a weapon and shoot me. I didn't know if, this was his way of drawing me in. Like, I don't know. His adrenaline must have been just going at 1,000%. And he was in panic mode, I think. And he said, all I could think to do was to call 911 and get people there. And you could see from the video, other people had probably called 911 because this altercation was going on, because the cops are there very quickly, very quickly. Within 30, on the last 30-second segment of this video, you see the cops pull up both sides. So they were there pretty quickly. So that's all I have for you today. So I really believe, here's what I think is going to happen. I think that's going to be it for the prosecution in the Bill Zielinski Reptile case has already rested. I think this is it for the defense. I don't think they have any more witnesses. It will go to a jury this afternoon. We'll be on verdict watch. I will try to bring that verdict to you when it happens. And then the Scott Peterson trial, the defense is putting on their case, and they're continuing. The last time I looked, they were continuing to put witnesses on the stand, the defense. So I will cover that for you in tomorrow's episode of Crafting and Crime Daily. I know I didn't do much diamond painting at all, but I've been doing a lot today listening to the trial. I'll show you where I'm at. I think these flowers are turning out so beautiful, you guys. Look, there's a rabbit. I don't know if you can see, there's another rabbit, a butterfly. Then there's these beautiful flowers that I've really blinged, like crystals. They're really going to stand out. All right, guys, that's the show for today. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you tomorrow in the Friday episode of Crafting and Crime Daily, where I do the Friday dance, the pre-retreat dance. Yes. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.